Snow fell like silent ashes over Lone Creek, a forgotten western town that had once echoed with the laughter of miners, cowboys and travelers, but now breathed in long, tired sighs of cold winds and empty streets. Among the few souls who stayed even when the gold dried up was Calder Hayes, a rancher with a reputation harder than the ice on the water troughs. Tall, rough-jawed, and marked by old heartbreak, he was the kind of man women admired from afar but never dared to approach, and he preferred it that way. After losing his fiancée years ago to sickness, Calder had closed his heart like the doors of an abandoned saloon, refusing every woman in town who tried to melt the frost around him. Some flirted, some hinted at marriage, some even brought him pies hoping to warm his cold evenings. But Calder simply shook his head, muttering the same sentence, "I don't need a wife. Winter teaches a man how to survive alone." That was until the day the wagon rolled into Lone Creek carrying a frightened Chinese widow named Lian, her 2 young sons, clutching her dress as they stepped onto the snow-covered ground with nothing but a suitcase and the weight of a journey filled with loss. The townsfolk stared, some with curiosity, some with judgment, for strangers were never welcomed easily, especially those who looked and spoke differently. Lian had traveled from the railroad camps, fleeing cruel labor, bosses after her husband died in an explosion that no one cared enough to investigate. She hoped Lone Creek, a place whispered about by travelers, might offer a chance to start again, or at least a safe place to breathe. But coldness lived in the hearts of frontier towns almost as much as it lived in their winters. She approached homes asking for work, for shelter, for mercy, but doors closed before she could finish her sentences. Her children shivered, hungry and exhausted, their shoes worn, their cheeks red from the biting cold. She tried the saloon, the inn, the blacksmith's shop, each time receiving the same dismissive wave or harsh whisper. And just when she felt the last of her strength slipping, a horse trotted past her slowly. The man riding it had eyes as stern as the mountains behind him and a presence that made even silence hold its breath. Calder Hayes. Lian didn't know his name then, but she recognized a man familiar with loneliness, something she had known too well. Calder dismounted when he noticed the trembling child in her arms and the way the older boy held her hand with desperate determination. "You lost?" he asked, his voice rough but not unkind. Lian swallowed, gathering courage that had been worn thin by miles. "We need work, a place to stay. I clean, cook, sew, anything. Just need chance." Calder studied her, his gaze hardening like he was building a wall around himself, brick by brick. "Most folks around here can barely keep themselves fed," he replied. "Ain't much help they can offer strangers." He started to walk past her, but he stopped when he heard a soft, broken sob from the child on her hip. Leon's eyes glistened as she whispered, more to herself than to him, "Please." "I have no one." Calder stood still for a moment, snow gathering on his hat brim. Something in those words tugged at a place he had buried long ago. But fear, old, stubborn fear, forced him to turn away. "Try the next town," he said, though he knew it was a 2-day walk through freezing mountains. Lean shivered as the wind whipped around her thin dress. "We won't survive another night out there," she whispered. The boy beside her tugged on her sleeve, whispering, "Mama, we stay here, please." Calder heard it, but he kept moving, forcing his mind to stay cold, convincing himself he owed nobody anything. But that night, long after he returned to his ranch, he could not sleep. The image of the woman, holding her children in the snow, pressed on him like a weight he couldn't lift. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He told himself people die in winters all the time. He told himself he didn't need anyone and no one needed him. But then the northern wind howled like a cry, and he muttered into the darkness, "Damn it." Meanwhile, Lian and her boys huddled inside an abandoned shed behind the general store, the cold squeezing the breath from their chests. The older boy tried to stay awake, rubbing his brother's hands to keep them warm, but his small body trembled uncontrollably. Lian prayed silently, asking for even the smallest mercy, and mercy arrived not as an angel, but as a stubborn cowboy, stomping through the snow with a lantern in his hand. "You and your kids will freeze out here," Calder grumbled. "Come on." Lian looked up, disbelief filling her eyes. Where we go?" Calder clenched his jaw. "My place," he answered. "But only for the night." She nodded gratefully, gathering her boys. But before she stepped out, She looked at him with surprising boldness and asked the question that would change both their lives. You want a wife? Or another winter alone? Calder froze. The lantern flickered, and for the first time in years, the cold inside him cracked. Calder stood motionless, her unexpected question ringing in the icy night air like a gunshot that missed its target but still rattled the heart. No woman had ever spoken to him with such raw bravery, such exhaustion, or such unfiltered truth. Leon didn't say it like a flirtation or a plea. She said it like a woman who had run out of time, out of hope, and out of fear, and something deep inside. Calder, something he buried since the day his fiancée died, shifted painfully. He didn't answer her question then, simply jerked his head and told her to follow him as he carried her sleeping child. His horse snorted clouds of steam as they climbed into the saddle. Leon and her older boy walked beside him, too cold to speak but warmed by the spark of safety, however fragile. At the ranch, he made a fire, cooked beans, and found blankets from an old trunk. Leon watched him, quietly, noticing how he moved, rough hands, cautious eyes, a man who knew work and loneliness better than laughter. When she whispered thank you, he grunted like gratitude was a burden he wasn't good at receiving. Days passed. Calder intended to let them stay only until the storm eased. But every day he found another reason they should remain a little longer. First it was because the youngest boy had a cough. Then because Leon fixed his torn coat better than any tailor in town. Then because she cooked meals he didn't know he needed. And then because of the way her presence softened the silence in the house. But despite the warmth they brought, Calder kept distance. Not unkind, but careful. A man who had built walls for years doesn't tear them down in a week. One morning, Leon found him chopping wood with a fury that made the axe echo through the valley. She approached quietly. You don't like us here? She asked softly. Calder stopped mid-swing. It's not that. Then what? He stared at the snow-dusted ground. People I care about? They leave, or life takes them, or I lose them. Leon's voice trembled as she replied, I lost my husband. I know that pain, but we still need people, even broken ones. The words hit him harder than the winter wind. One evening, the boy, Wei, came to Calder carrying a badly carved wooden horse. For you, he said shyly. Calder stared at it, surprised. Why? Because you make Mama smile again. That night Calder sat on his porch, the children asleep, Leon mending one of his shirts inside. He lifted the carved horse and sighed. What are you doing, Hayes? He muttered to himself. You said no more attachments. The next morning the town gossip mill churned. People whispered that a foreign woman and her children were living at Hayes Ranch. Some disapproved, some mocked. At the general store, Mrs. Dooley scoffed. Calder Hayes finally found someone desperate, enough to take him. Another man sneered. Bet she's after his land. When Calder heard the rumors, his jaw tightened. When Leon heard them, tears pricked her eyes, not because she believed them, but because she feared Calder might. She tried to talk to him that evening. If you want us to leave, we can. Calder stiffened. Who said that? People, she replied quietly. People talk. People judge. They don't understand us. Calder stepped closer, gripping the edge of the table. I don't give a damn what they think, he said. But I care what you think. Leon looked up, startled. I think, she breathed, you're a good man, even if you try not to be. The silence between them warmed, thickened, settled. About what you asked me that night, Calder said slowly. Leon's heart hammered. I never wanted a wife again, he continued. But I also never wanted another winter alone. She stepped closer. Which do you choose now? Calder swallowed hard. I choose not being alone. And for the first time in years, he reached out, awkward, unsure, taking her hand. The warmth of that touch felt like the first sunrise after a long, bitter night. From that day forward, the ranch changed. Laughter returned. Footsteps filled the empty rooms. Leon planted herbs behind the kitchen. The boys fed chickens and followed Calder around like small shadows. And Calder, once a man defined by silence, found himself looking forward to voices in the morning and soft good nights in the evenings. The town eventually accepted them. Not all, but enough. People noticed how Calder defended Leon when men muttered insults. They saw how she stood by him when drought hit. And slowly, alone, Creek shifted from a coal town to a community that whispered less and welcomed more. One dusk, with the mountains glowing in orange light. Calder took Leon's hand outside the barn. She looked up, eyes shimmering. "What is it?" she asked. Calder exhaled deeply, a man stepping fully into a new chapter. "Leon, will you stay? As my wife, as the mother of my home?" Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "I asked you once, but I never thought you'd ask me back." Calder leaned down and kissed her forehead, gently, sealing a promise born from winter and forged by courage. And that night, as snow began to fall again, the ranch glowed with warm light, no longer a place of loneliness, but a home rebuilt from heartbreak and hope, a reminder that sometimes love arrives from the most unexpected corners of the world.